Welcome to PedsCrit. I'm Zach Hodges, a pediatric ICU fellow from UT Southwestern in Dallas.
And I'm Al Shanklin, a critical care fellow at Children's National in Washington, D.C.
PedsCrit is a collaborative open access educational podcast for PICU fellows, attendings, and really anyone who takes care of critically ill children.
Yes, and today we are talking about the arc of your career in critical care medicine and how to structure your path so that it's well aligned with leadership positions.
And to do that, we are pleased to interview Dr. Jim Fortenberry. Dr. Fortenberry is a professor of pediatrics in the Division of Pediatric Critical Care at Emory University School of Medicine. He is the Chief Medical Officer of Children's Healthcare of Atlanta and the Interim Chief of Critical Care. He is a past chair of the Critical Care Subboard of the American Board of Pediatrics and has served on SCCM and AAP critical care committees. We are so very thankful for him sharing his time with us today.
Yes, this is a great conversation. Let's get right to the interview.
Welcome back to the podcast. We are so excited to be sitting down today with Dr. Jim Fortenberry from Children's Hospital of Atlanta. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Fortenberry. To get things started, will you please tell us something about yourself and include something you enjoy outside of medicine?
Sure. I'm Jim Fortenberry. I'm Chief Medical Officer at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, here in Atlanta with Emory University School of Medicine. And I've been here a long time. I just hit 30 plus years at Children's and Emory, which is a long time. It's sort of unusual these days to have spent so much time in one place, but a lot of that had to do with this being home for me. I was born here in Atlanta, and we made our way back. And also it's because I love this place. I love the people. I love our mission and our vision here at Children's. So that's kept me here. What do I like to do outside of medicine? Well, I guess number one is our kids and now grandkids. We have 6 grandkids, so we've been fortunate that all of our kids have stayed in Atlanta for different reasons. So I get to play a lot, babysit, go to Little League games, dance recitals. So that's life. I love to read. I love to travel. We're actually going on this is sort of a nerd trip, I would say, going to England at the end of the month on
Nice.
with a group of people. It's called Inklings Abroad. It's related to, if you know who the Inklings are, authors J.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, Owen Barfield. They were professors at Oxford, and they came together at the Eagle and Child pub on a weekly basis. And so we're going to follow their footsteps and see what really drove them in their writing. And it's a good excuse to go to England.
Oh, that is awesome. We are familiar with J.R. Tolkien. Yes. Dr. Fortenberry, this is an interview about leadership, but before we get into your current position and how you see that, I'd love to hear about your early career in life. How did you end up in pediatric critical care?
That is, and that could be an hour story right there. But I actually went to college to be an archaeologist. I thought that's what I wanted to do. I got interested in it because I loved history, and I went to the University of North Carolina to be an archaeologist. And I took my first archaeology course and realized maybe it wasn't Indiana Jones and everything I thought it would be. So I really started thinking a little more. I knew I always wanted to serve somehow and serve people. And my roommate was pre-med, and he got me interested going and volunteering in the kids' playroom at UNC Memorial Hospitals and then the emergency room. And I just sort of fell in love with it, started taking courses, fell in love with the design of the human body, the anatomy, the physiology, how it all came together. And so I shifted gears and went to medical school. Was planning all along to do rural health care. Actually, I applied for the National Health Service Corps, if you're familiar with that, but actually they decided I was too cityfied, I guess, from Atlanta, and they were looking for people who grew up in the small towns of Georgia. And we still planned general pediatrics. My best friend and I, we were going to go into practice together and went to a residency that was very focused on community pediatrics. But at the time that I was in pediatrics, pediatric critical care was really developing as a specialty. Actually, while I was a resident, I believe was the first critical care boards were held, and we did not have an intensivist where I trained. And so I just fell in love with it more and more. I realized what I really loved was taking care of kids and their families at the most difficult times of their lives when everything else fell away. Whether you're rich, poor, whatever your your station in life, it all came down to your child and them getting better. And so I really just sort of fell in love with critical care and shifted gears again and decided to go into what was then the burgeoning field of pediatric critical care. And I went to Texas Children's for my fellowship at Baylor, Houston. And again, I connected in so many ways there. I never thought I'd be interested in research, and I had an incredible mentor, a physician named Michelle Mariscalco, who really got me excited about something I never would think about, white cells and lung injury. And so I ended up doing a lot of research there and stayed on at Texas Children's. Even afterwards, I was asked to take a position there, and so stayed on. But we always wanted to get back to Atlanta. And within a year of accepting a position at Texas Children's to stay on faculty, got an opportunity to come back to Atlanta, and we've been here ever since.
It's a great story, thinking about the arc from thinking about rural medicine and then the different ways life takes you down toward pediatric critical care. And as a trainee, thinking about going into a specialty where there was no one in my institution who actually was an intensivist, it's a new specialty, and just jumping right in. What a bold and very valuable decision that you made that you're certainly still reaping the benefits of. The mention about a key mentor, that is a theme from almost all of our conversations. There's always a key mentor who makes or helps you make a very pivotal decision that many of our guests benefit from years and years to come. Would like to hear more about during your training as you were finishing up in your fellowship, what kind of career did you have in mind for yourself at that time?
And as I mentioned before, I always thought, and I knew I loved clinical care. I knew I loved working with families, working with kids, and I got very interested in lung injury and sepsis. And so I knew I was headed that direction, but I mentioned Michelle, Dr. Mariscalco, and she got me working at this incredible white cell biology lab. It was a place that had helped discover a number of the leukocyte adhesion molecules that, at the time they were brand new, but we all know about them now, ICAM and ELAM and CD11B and CD18 and all those good things, and got really interested in that. And so that helped direct me away from what I had originally planned to do, which was to go back to Charlotte and do purely clinical critical care there and be the first intensivist back there, and headed more on the research pathway along with my clinical care. And so that's how I ended up coming to Atlanta, was the opportunity to do both. So I guess it is a little bit of maybe the arc for me has always been, in my career and my development, has always been organic. I wish I could say I looked back and I was very intentional about everything, but I kept getting connected with people, as you mentioned, Zach, mentors, opportunities that just kept propelling me forward to doing things that I really enjoy doing. This opportunity in Atlanta that I came to, it was to do clinical care, to do research, and then, oh, by the way, also to help get the fellowship here in Atlanta accredited. We here in Atlanta had some fellows that started down that pathway, but we hadn't become fully accredited. So that became another part of my job, the tripartite mission. I ended up coming here with it all, with clinical and research, working in a lab here, and then getting the fellowship started.
Oh, I hadn't really thought about how at this time it was so pivotal to building a field, the part where you're either going to be the PICU person at an institution where you want to work, or you must build up the fellowship to get to the point where everyone is sort of marching in line.
Yeah, it doesn't feel all that long ago, but I guess it was 30 years. It seems like yesterday. Mm-hmm. But it is fascinating to see what's happened in pediatric critical care, the way it's accelerated, the growth in numbers, and what we looked at as a normal call schedule of every third or fourth night versus what makes so much more sense nowadays with the numbers of patients and the complexity and all that too.
So you certainly arrived in Atlanta with a number of skills that made you well able to do the tripartite mission that you mentioned. Alice and I, second-year fellows, many of our listeners are also fellows, possibly many in the second year as well. And we're kind of on this precipice of choosing what's the next several years of our life going to look like after fellowship. And do you have any recommendations for people like us who maybe are trying to figure out what are our skill sets? What are we really good at? And how to leverage those for our next step?
Yeah, I think, we mentioned it a little earlier, and that really is at that point in your career is really finding someone who can serve to mentor you, to direct you. That there's two kind of mentors too. There's the research mentor and there's the academic mentor, and then there's the life mentor. And I had the good fortune of having, Michelle served both those roles, but then I had some other mentors there in my training at Texas Children's. A guy named Fernando Stein, who was just a phenomenal colleague and has remained a friend through the years, but really to help to guide me and to give me that. And again, the story of my career has really been around continuing to keep a lot of options open. And I know for me, that was so valuable. And I guess I would encourage, I still do in our training program here at Fellows, to keep their options open, as opposed to trying to go down a tight pathway and figure out I've got it figured out the rest of the way, is to really be open to those opportunities. Now, you do need to have focus, particularly around research. You've got to have some degree of carving out that time for yourself when you go to your eventual attendinghood, but also to be open to saying yes to other opportunities along the way. And this was for me too. Say yes more than you say no. You do have to say no to some things, because you will get, as you finish up your fellowship, as you go into an attending, you'll be barraged with 100 things like, hey, Zach's here. It's time to add all these things to his plate or take them off our plate. But that balance gives you a chance to try out different things, especially early on. You may be very focused on research or academic endeavors there, but be willing to try out some of those other things too. And I know for me, that was very helpful, even as I started out. Being willing to take on the fellowship, even though I was coming to work in a lab. I'm so glad I did that. It gave me the chance to really take that pathway.
So when you're working with your new PICU attendings now and you're onboarding them and sort of talking about what their goal is in, 5 years, 10 years, how do you recommend they screen opportunities or select opportunities to tailor their interests and move their career forward?
For new attendings, again, there's sort of this buffet in front of them oftentimes. There's so many opportunities. And I certainly do encourage the attending to find that number one thing that gives you joy. We've just been in the midst here. I'm serving as the interim critical care chief. I've kind of come full circle. I'm the CMO here, but as we are doing a lot of transitioning here at Children's in anticipation of a new hospital, we've hired 12 attendings,
Wow.
which is almost unheard of, but it's because we're building for the new hospital too. But I've tried to help them identify, again, that primary source of joy in addition to care. Clinical care is number one. And I want to make sure that our new fellows who become attendings, our young, attendings who are coming in with maybe a year or two out, is that they make sure that they take care of kids as job one, and that they spend that early time making sure that they don't jump ahead of themselves. If you're not respected or regarded by the rest of the team in the ICU, it makes it a lot harder to step into some of those other positions and some of those leadership positions. I think your clinical skill set and your recognition as someone who cares for patients and cares about patients, that really is going to be your calling card when you step into other opportunities. So I really make sure that the attendings focus first on patient care. And that first year, it's easy to want to jump into everything else, everything else in that buffet, whether it's research or otherwise, or additional educational training. But make sure you've got that solid platform of good patient care. So I definitely encourage that. And then I do really try to help them find something that they can see as a primary direction. That doesn't mean, again, I can share my story. I ended up going so many different directions, and then I kind of gradually came together at the end there. But I know with all these new attendings that we've hired, we've really tried to identify opportunities, whether it's developing clinical trials, informatics as a specialty. We've got one attending she started a master's in education, and we're supporting her in continuing that. Another young attending who will be working towards her master's of science in clinical research. So we do want to give one pillar to drive that, on top of the platform of clinical care. I do encourage that direction finding, knowing that you've got the opportunity early on to find a different pathway. But starting that way really does help. The other extreme is sort of going into it with 10 things that you want to do, and 5 years into it, suddenly you haven't really had a chance to pattern yourself and find that direction. So again, a lot of that came from my mentors at Texas Children's, and they really helped me find myself around being excellent clinically, focusing on, for me, it was that clinical research opportunity, but then also developing myself as a leader. Again, as a young attending, you're stepping into that role from being the resident and then the fellow to really being the person that everybody is looking to. As the attending physician, you are it now, right? There's nobody behind you. There's no, you have your partners, you have your colleagues, but in that moment, everyone's eyes are fixed on you. So that becomes really your first opportunity for leadership as a young attending, is to be leading the team, leading a code, leading resuscitation of a deteriorating patient. So that becomes your other growth opportunity as a new attending.
It's an exceptional answer and many practical tips for our early career attendings. Closing out this section on early career, I'd like to hear more about your transition from Texas to Atlanta and why that made most sense for your situation.
Sure. For me, it was practical. It was about our family. I was from Atlanta. I mentioned my wife's best friend was from Atlanta. My parents were still here. So that was, family was a driver. I wanted to come to a good place. I wanted to be able to build a career as well, too. And sometimes timing is everything. When I was first looking in Atlanta, for a variety of reasons, it just wasn't a good fit. I was fortunate enough that Dr. Ralph Feigen, who, again, was another, he was just a legend at Texas Children's, offered me a position to stay in Houston and start my career there. And so we did. But it was with an understanding that we really wanted to get to Atlanta. And so I was very thankful he did that. But 6 months into my position, I got a call back. Everything had changed at Emory. New division chief, new, just so much happening. And I sort of went with maybe a little bit of my tail between my legs to say, hey, would it be possible to go? And everyone knew that was where we wanted to be and needed to be. And they were incredibly supportive of me finishing my first year there and then moving to Atlanta. I don't think I would recommend that to any of the fellows out there. I think you'd like to build that. But for me, it was a perfect opportunity to stay and keep some of my research going for that 1 year. It was almost like an additional research year, and then move to Atlanta. And as I mentioned, we've been here ever since 1992.
I think your comments highlight how important family can be for many individuals, and of course for myself as well. In getting that location, you need that job that has all the professional things that you need for satisfaction, but being in the spot where it's near to family, gosh, that's really important for longevity.
And your wife's best friend.
Yeah.
Yes, there's an old Southern saying, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. So that's really important. And I've been reminded for the last 30 years of why it was so important for us to make that move. Again, things happen for a reason, and I'm so glad we've been here. And I've been so excited to be a part of seeing what's happened at Emory and Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, which is another story in and of itself. It's this incredible merger of two systems back in 1998, and it's become one of the largest children's healthcare programs in the country, top 2, 3, 4. It's amazing to see what's going on. I mentioned we're building a new hospital, 446-bed children's hospital that's adding to the system. And so it's just been wonderful to be here.
Oh, absolutely. So for our listeners who are interested in the leadership path, how do leadership positions and opportunities differ as a mid-career attending compared to more of a junior attending? What kind of things are people being tapped for as they advance?
There are differences by mid-career. I think as you move towards mid-career, again, you don't want to be 5 to 10 years out and not really having tried anything or not really having or offered yourself for a leadership role and then decide, hey, I want to be in administration, I want to be a leader, I want to be a medical staff leader. It's sort of building that background of being willing to say yes. I mentioned that earlier, say yes more than you say no. You want to be thoughtful, but you also want to be willing to step in. And what tends to happen too early on is if you agree to serve on a committee and you're recognized as someone who's willing to show up, which is 90% of life, and contribute and be there, people recognize you. And then the next time it's like, hey, Zach or Alice, they offered great ideas, they listened, and mainly they were committed and they showed up. And then one job leads to the next. So I always try to emphasize that, developing that so that, again, you leave yourself open to opportunities. Building those blocks is really important. And for a mid-career person, sometimes it is a change. Certainly friends who've made some changes, they recognize that. I can speak to that as well. I mentioned research. I was involved. I had an American Lung Grant. I was really thought I was headed down that direction. Still very involved clinically. We had a very busy clinical service and a small group. There were some changes here in our relationship with the university, and I had to think, do I wake up every morning wanting to do research? Is that what's going to be my driver, my daily joy? And I recognized that when it came to lab research, I enjoyed it, but there were so many other opportunities that were in front of me that I really shifted gears. I stayed very involved in clinical research and clinical trials and just working with the fellows, doing a lot of retrospective studies and all that. So I've always enjoyed that, but I did shift gears more towards leadership roles. I said yes to a variety of things. I'd served as the fellowship director, but I was asked to be the ECMO director there, here at Children's and Emory. Was asked to be the medical director and stayed on with that, and was asked to be the division chief and stayed with that. And again, it was saying yes and hopefully demonstrating my interest and my commitment and my proficiency, I hope, in some ways there along the way. I think for that mid-career person, it is intentional, but it also is built on starting small as a fellow, becoming an attending, being willing to step into some selected areas. And that's, again, where a mentor can help you too, to help you really know when it's a yes and when it's a no. And that, for me, it was Michelle. I would call her a bunch and ask her advice, and she was very good. And sometimes she said, Jim, you need to be selfish. You need to be selfish with your time. And that sounds funny, right? I mean, it's like nobody's selfish, but it was really about focus, finding the right direction, making sure you were taking care of your family and you were taking care of your career. I think for a mid-career person, it's taking stock with your mentor. Several other things I would suggest are looking at opportunities in your institution. And I've found this more and more when attendings come in, particularly those that maybe have been out a few years and they're moving to Atlanta for a reason. They've asked, and we have identified the value of them getting an assessment for their skill set, for their executive capabilities, for their potential for coaching. So that's something that you could ask as you interview to say, again, you don't need to do that day one, right? You're trying to find unit restrooms, but that opportunity to say, I really want to develop and I really would like that opportunity to get some idea of who I am as a person, who I am as a potential leader. We found that very helpful to bring particularly those mid-career people in that may be coming in as for instance, we have a new fellowship director coming in here at Children's. He's about 7 years out. I think seeking those things out are really helpful. One other thing I would add, and really this is not necessarily mid-career, but certainly I love to read. I mentioned I love to read. And there are some incredible books there that really help you as you're thinking about this conceptually, you as a physician and a physician leader. Bunches of them, and they're helpful to you in your daily patient care too. A book called Crucial Conversations was one that I highly recommend to every fellow, even before they become an attending, to step into that, because it's really about every conversation in your life, but it becomes more and more germane to being a leader as well when you do that. There's another one called Dare to Lead, a psychologist who's named Brené Brown, who is phenomenal. There's some great YouTube videos of, or TED Talks from her as well too. But Adam Grant is another one that just picking that up, oftentimes they're very kind of quick reads, easy reads, but they're germane to your life, they're germane to care, but they also kind of help give you some guiding principles as you start thinking about stepping more and more into leadership.
Oh, excellent. You mentioned two things that I need to hear more about. Formal personality assessments in the workplace for people who have been working for you for years as you think about their potential, and then coaching. Would you mind expanding on those a little bit?
There's so many opportunities. We've tried to really build out our opportunities here at Children's to to identify physicians who we would see practically as having potential and giving them the opportunity to do some testing. I don't know if you're familiar with the Hogan test is another one. Again, you can actually do this online yourself, but we have tried to really identify young leaders as they step into different roles, and even if we're anticipating that, giving them those opportunities. So I would encourage that, and there are opportunities to do it on your own, but then your institution hopefully would also give you that opportunity. Through us, it's our human resources department, because we have a learning services division that manages a lot of this. And so I think seeking out and asking, if you're again, coming into a position or at that mid-career where you really want to think through what's next, if you haven't already done it, I think those are great things to ask for. It's not a ton of work. There's some huge executive assessments that we do when people are coming, looking at chief positions and those kind of things. But there are much smaller, much more compact kind of assessments that you can do as well. Coaching, you asked about too. Coaching is, I will say this, coaching is not cheap. It reflects a commitment from your institution to helping you develop. And that's why I ask, sometimes early on, asking about that opportunity. Different institutions have internal coaches, and external coaches is where there's a significant expense involved with those, but that does reflect an institution's commitment. But there are also a lot of opportunities, and again, depends on where you're at, where we identify people who can kind of go alongside that person and really, as they're developing as young faculty, to really meet with them. Usually it's on a quarterly basis. It's a little bit different from a mentor. I think a mentor is guiding you. I think a coach is really helping you identify resources, sometimes ask you the hard questions about how you're doing or where issues are or how to get better. But I'm a big proponent of both those. I know in my own career, I've had the opportunity through the years to get assessments and coaching to help me. As I really started thinking more and more, I enjoy working with people. I enjoy these leadership opportunities and to get those chances to say, where am I good? Where do I need some strengthening?
When I reflect on your comments here, it sure seems like that the mid-career, you're going to be really busy. You're going to be jumped into your clinical service, your research, your administrative, perhaps your education. All of these roles you're going to be at full speed ahead in all of these. And it takes an intentional commitment to ongoing professional development. This isn't something you just do on the weekends. It may be something like a professional assessment or coaching, or there needs to be some structure to how you continue to invest in yourself during this very busy period of your career.
Yeah, I think you described it very well. And another one of those sayings that goes around, I think it's true, is like, if you're looking for somebody to do a job, find the busiest person out there. And I think what it says is you're finding somebody who's been willing to say yes and who's been willing to engage and step in and help, be a helper, right? To borrow from Mr. Rogers. But but I think that does say something. And I think people recognize that. Even early on, they recognize, young attendings who come in, and you can tell that they want to make a difference. They want to make a difference at the bedside, but they also want to do more with that.
Yeah.
And obviously, I say all that with a caveat to make sure you're taking care of yourself, your family, and yourself. It's that balancing act, too. So there are times to say no. I've said that. There are plenty of times to say no, too. And that's sometimes where both mentors and coaches in different ways can make sure that you're not, there's so much excitement sometimes coming out of fellowship into attendinghood. You want to get all the candy from the candy store there. Sometimes asking somebody is like, hey, am I doing too much? Am I taking on too much? That's where those folks can help you too.
Yeah, any kind of additional perspective certainly can be helpful. Say you have that mid-career attending in your office, you're chatting with them about their next steps, and they ask you for advice. And what advice would you have for this mid-career attending who, let's say they defined what's important to them, they're getting involved in various leadership positions, and they want to work towards more prominent leadership roles? What advice would you have for them?
We've talked a little bit about it, about being prepared. It's one of those deals where your preparation, you're building up some of those pillars in advance, sets you up for that, right? It's hard. I mean, it is realistically hard to start from scratch and say, I want to be a leader. I want to be in a physician administrative role. So I think To back it up just a little bit, you want to try to get to that point where they're coming to you after having tried out a variety of things, demonstrating their interest and their proficiency. And so when I'm sitting in that situation with that person, let's assume that they have dabbled or they've tried or they've found some direction there, is to take that step back and I ask them, it's like, what is your why, right? Again, another guy named Simon Sinek, another great TED Talk guy. But I think that concept of taking a step back and saying, why do you want to keep doing these things? What is your why? What is your driver? And I think that's really important to sit down and have that talk with that mid-career person. It doesn't hurt to ask that question every day of your life, but particularly when it's around that next step. And let's assume that that person has connected in different ways and they found that, and they have a good explanation of their why. Then I really try to line them up with opportunity. This is where going to whether it's your division chief or another leader within the institution, having that connection with them and asking them for practical opportunities. For physicians in particular, there's several areas, right? A huge value for me was being asked to serve as the president of the medical staff back around the turn of the century. In the 2000s, I was asked to take on, I had served different roles in medical staff, and I was asked to serve that. That was a phenomenally valuable experience. When people are interested in leadership as a physician, I encourage them around professional staff. The other directions around physician leadership are more on the academic side. You've got people that they've started down that career path, they've worked towards promotion, or they've engaged themselves in research or teaching opportunities. I really sit down with them and just try to take a little bit of a walk through their CV together and say, hey, what's the specific area that seems to be coalescing here, which direction you go. When it comes to physician leadership, you do kind of have those buckets. You have academic leadership, you have professional leadership, you have national leadership, whether it's going towards being, Society for Critical Care Medicine, going for a leadership opportunity that way, or it's going more towards the pathway that I ended up driving towards, which was executive leadership in the system. I mentioned serving as division chief, did that about 7 years. I was asked to take on a new position called pediatrician in chief. It was very different from the standard pediatrician in chief role around the country, which is typically the department chair. It was a result of our merger, but it became a direction that took me down the pathway towards becoming chief physician officer with oversight for our physician practices, and then chief medical officer, which is the role that I sit on now. So I think having that conversation can help guide you in one of those, 4 pathways there.
Nice. What advice would you have for the senior pediatric intensivists? These are people who are likely in the most impactful leadership positions of their career.
Wow, it's a great question, I think, and I'm still working on that one. I'm working on that one personally. I'm very senior. I'm closer to the end of my career than the beginning. I will throw out another, I love books. I'd throw out another book. And I just read it. It's called Strength to Strength. It's by a guy named Arthur Brooks. And it really is about that transition from mid to later career. And he talks about identifying fluid intelligence or fluid activity where you're constantly doing stuff, you're constantly innovating, you're constantly working, to what's a more crystallized intelligence or a crystallized activity. It's really building off your career and saying, what can I do with all that I've learned in my career? How can I take that? How can I transmit that to other people? And so it's a bit of a transition from one strength to another strength, and recognizing that there is such a need out there for some of these things we talked about, mentorship, coaching, those kind of almost consulting opportunities that you might have to lead people that way, and to be constantly building your succession plan. Obviously, the younger faculty member should be part of that succession plan. One of the mistakes that I've seen made is a physician gets in a role, they're in a leader role, they're the division chief or whatever, and they love what they're doing, and it's hard to let go. It's hard to say, I need to build for the next group of young people who are going to come in and get to have the joy of what I did. So I think for that senior leader, it's really working very hard to develop succession plans and identifying opportunities for those people too, so people like you will have the same joy of doing fun stuff as well.
Dr. Fortenberry, you've had a great amount of success, and we really have enjoyed listening to you share lessons learned with us. I feel like another question to include here that would work well is, as you reflect over your career, do you have any favorite failures, so to speak? Maybe things that didn't turn out as intended, but perhaps provided a lesson learned.
Let's see. I've learned a lot from my mistakes with patients, I think, as we all have. I probably shouldn't share those here, but maybe I should. And I think those are some of you want to be perfect with your patients. And I think the recognition that you can't be perfect is important to share that. I know we just had a session where some of the senior people shared the mistakes that they made with a patient. And thankfully, most of the time they were fixable mistakes, but they were a reminder. And when you sit around with a group of people, especially for younger people to hear that, I shared my story of, this is back before Epic. This is back before the EMR helped create the opportunity to prevent you from doing some dumb stuff. I wrote a 10 times error that I made, again, back in the day, aminophylline. And, the nurse who trusted me implicitly, she thought things weren't exactly right, but she knew me and she always trusted me. And this child was incredibly tachycardic. And we were like, what is going on here? And we went back and we poured through it and realized the mistake. Thankfully, the kid did okay through all that. I don't know, it was just one of those moments in my time where I realized how, number one, how much other people depended on me, how much my patients depended on me, how much the nursing team depended on me, and also that I was a fallible human being. It was a good reminder. That was like 30 years ago, but it still stuck with me, that one particular time, that one particular feeling. It's helped me in a number of ways through all my clinical career to never write a 10 times error again, to double, triple check myself, and now, thanks to EMR, not to have to worry about it, but also to remember that feeling so that I could share it with other people, so that I could commiserate with faculty members or colleagues. We've started a program here. It's several years back, but it's called You Matter. But it really is, you're probably familiar with the second victim idea, which is really that as physicians, that something happens to a patient, the patient and the family are dealing with that, but the physician is dealing with the impact on that, whether it's rightly or wrongly deserved feeling about, could I have done something differently, or I should have done something differently, and dealing with that. And I guess out of our collective personal failures as physicians, we were able to put this program together, and we've got peer supporters, a huge cadre of physician peer supporters, so that whenever there's an issue, a problem, an O&S, that we reach out. We have a formalized way to do that, to identify and reach out to the physician and basically say, hey, are you okay? And to be willing to talk and to pull that aside in any kind of non-judgmental way, or if it's just to sit, right? Sometimes people don't want to talk about it. It's like, I just want to sit. I've found that out of failure, that has become an incredibly valuable program for us here at Children's.
Thank you so much for sharing that story and just being vulnerable with your local peers and also with us here today, and just seeing how you wrestled with that mistake and what you learned from it. And then now as an executive, enforcing mechanisms to help physicians dealing with that in the current moment. That's so incredibly helpful. Dr. Fortenberry, as we move towards the final couple of questions for us today, I'd like to know what's next for you. Do you have any unmet goals for your career?
Getting to the new hospital for sure here. It's 18 months. It's scary. They keep putting this little days until we're open. We've got to open up that new hospital in about 508 days, I think is what it is now.
Wow.
Everybody's experienced. Y'all have experienced it probably more than most because you have been doing your training in the midst of something craziness, unprecedented times. And we committed to continuing to build this hospital in the midst of COVID and then the triple-demic and all of these nursing challenges. And we tried to just keep looking for the thing. It's a shiny building, so it's huge. It's 19 stories. It's a beacon.
Oh my gosh.
It's just a box though, right? It's a box unless we put the right people, the right physicians, the right nurses, the right, you name it, EVS, everything in there. And I'm committed to staying until we get that building open and hopefully a little bit past that. That's a biggie certainly from a personal level. And we're excited. It's going to happen. With or without us, I guess it's going to happen. That's a biggie for us here.
Oh, absolutely.
So you have a number of positions and many high leadership positions, and I'm sure that your phone rings 24/7. You get emails at all times of the day. I'd like to know, what is your motivation for continuing to work so hard? What is your why?
It's a great question. And I get I get emotional every time I think about my why. And at its core, it's my grandkids, because I watch them. I get to, again, I get the joy of being here and in Atlanta, where they're all here, and having gone through some really, a tragic situation with one of the grandkids, and just seeing how much of a difference we can make in pediatric healthcare. That's certainly my driver, and continues to be my driver, and is my driver to seeing us get better and to not be satisfied, to keep training wonderful people like you two. So that's it.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
It's an incredible job that we have to take care of these kids and these families on the worst days of their life, to lean in and be with them and help them. Gosh, there's not a better job in the world that I think.
It's a privilege, honor, blessing. You pick the word, but I think y'all are epitomizing that too, and that's what makes me so excited about being a leader and getting to watch that and getting to start, to build those succession plans, is to see what incredible people, better people than me, coming up to take care of kids.
Dr. Fortenberry, I've made a list of the books and resources you mentioned so far. We'll be putting them in our show notes. Is there anything else you'd like to share with listeners, or that you'd recommend our listeners look into?
Thanks for sharing those books, because I think they're good reads. I think you've really hit on some great questions. This is a chance to say thank you. Thank you to people like yourselves who chose this career, who chose pediatric critical care. It is a hard job, but it is a rewarding job. And thankfully, one thing about pediatric critical care is, even in the most highly complex and highly critical or acute critical care units in the country, most kids do well. And that's exciting. And it's exciting to be a part of that. And I just thank y'all for choosing pediatric critical care. I'm certainly biased, but it's the best field there is. You cut across so much, it gets back to what when I shared why I chose it, was you make a difference in everything else falls away when it's your kid or your grandkid, in that bed, and you're taking care of the child, and you're taking care of that family, that extended family. It's an honor to get to do that.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, Dr. Fortenberry, you have an incredible story, and I really appreciate you sharing us all these pearls and wisdoms and lessons learned across a career. I know I've learned a lot. I know our listeners will as well. Can't think of a better way to close this conversation than with this now. Alice and I, again, would like to thank you so much for your time and sharing it with us today.
Yes.
Thanks for the invitation, and thanks for what you're doing with this podcast too. Enjoy it.
And thank you for listening to this episode of PedsCrit. Please remember that all content during this episode is intended for informational and educational purposes only. It should not be used as replacement for medical advice. The views expressed during this episode by hosts and our guests are their own and do not reflect the official position of their institutions. If you have any comments, suggestions, or feedback, you can email us at pedscritpodcast@gmail.com or find us on Twitter @CritPeds and @PedsCrit on Instagram for real-time show updates. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review in your favorite podcasting application and share with your colleagues. Also, if you'd like to support the making of the podcast, please see the description for Venmo information and how to become a Patreon. Any donation will be appreciated. Thank you again for listening, and goodbye.